Imagine the most feared air force in the world suddenly crumbling. That's exactly what happened to the Luftwaffe against an unexpected opponent, the Red Tails. How did a seemingly outmatched squadron achieve such decisive air superiority, leading to the unforeseen collapse of German air defenses? We're diving deep into the tactical genius that rewrote the rules of aerial combat. In the early years of World War II, the German Luftwaffe seemed unstoppable. The black crosses of their fighters ruled the skies from Warsaw to Paris, and the howl of the Messerschmitt Bf 109 became the soundtrack of conquest. Their dive bombers, the dreaded Stukas, tore apart columns of retreating soldiers. Their aces, men like Galland, Mulders, and Hartmann, were worshipped like gods of the air. Britain, Russia, and even America feared the Luftwaffe's precision, discipline, and sheer audacity. But as the war dragged on, a silent decay began to rot the Luftwaffe from within, not from Allied firepower alone, but from exhaustion, overconfidence, and an enemy who learned faster than anyone expected. By 1943, the once invincible Luftwaffe was fighting a war it was no longer equipped to win. Its pilot training schools, once symbols of precision, now rushed inexperienced boys into cockpits after barely a few hours of flight time. The skies of Germany, once filled with proud veteran aces, became a graveyard of rookies sent to face swarms of American bombers and escort fighters. Fuel shortages strangled the Luftwaffe's wings. Planes were grounded for lack of aviation gasoline, and the Reich's synthetic fuel plants became priority targets for Allied bombers. Spare parts were scavenged from wrecks. Aircraft that could still take off were cannibalized to keep others flying. As Germany lost territory, so too did it lose its forward air bases, forcing its pilots to fly longer, riskier sorties from deeper inside the Reich.
The Luftwaffe was collapsing, but few realized it yet. Meanwhile, across the ocean, in the segregated training fields of Tuskegee, Alabama, another air force was being born, one the world underestimated from the start. These were the Red Tails, the 332nd Fighter Group of the United States Army Air Forces, composed entirely of African-American pilots who had to fight for the right to even fly in combat. They trained under constant scrutiny, facing discrimination, ridicule, and the low expectations of their own command. But under that pressure, something remarkable happened. Discipline was forged, precision was perfected, and a brotherhood of airmen emerged who would redefine aerial escort warfare. By the time the Red Tails took to the skies over Europe in 1944, the Luftwaffe was still a deadly foe, but its armor was cracked. Yet no one, not even the U.S. commanders, could have predicted how completely the Red Tails' tactical brilliance would finish what attrition had started. What began as a mission of equality soon turned into one of the most strategically significant chapters in the downfall of the German Air Force. as the Reich skies darkened with thousands of Allied bombers and German radar screens flickered with new threats. A handful of crimson-tailed fighters prepared to make history, not just by escorting bombers, but by redefining what air superiority really meant.
When the Red Tails arrived in Italy in early 1944, the war in the air had reached a brutal stalemate. American bombers, massive B-17s and B-24s, were tearing into German industry, but at a terrible cost. Entire formations were shredded by flak, and shredded further by swarms of Luftwaffe fighters that struck like hawks. Escort fighters had been introduced, first the P-38s, then the P-47 Thunderbolts, but their results were mixed. Pilots often broke formation to chase enemy aircraft, leaving bombers vulnerable. The bomber crews, trapped in slow-flying fortresses, called those moments the lonely minutes, when the sky turned black with German fighters and their supposed protectors were off chasing kills. When the Red Tails entered the scene, their leader, Colonel Benjamin O. Davis, Jr., imposed a doctrine that seemed almost counterintuitive. We stay with the bombers, no matter what. It was simple, it was strict, and it went against every instinct a fighter pilot was trained to follow. To many, it sounded like a waste of talent. The Tuskegee Airmen were told they wouldn't score many kills if they didn't go hunting. But Davis had a different vision. He understood that victory wasn't about body counts. It was about breaking the Luftwaffe's grip on the bombers. And so, under his leadership, the Red Tails developed one of the most disciplined escort tactics in aviation history. Their crimson-painted tails became a symbol of reliability. Bomber crews would later say that when they saw those red tails behind them, they knew they would make it home. The group flew close escort patterns, never more than a few thousand feet from the bomber boxes. Their focus wasn't to destroy the enemy. It was to deny the enemy any opportunity to strike effectively. But discipline was only half of their strength. The Red Tails also pioneered aggressive defensive flying that broke traditional Allied patterns. Instead of spreading thin to cover wide areas, they flew in compact, layered formations. If a Luftwaffe attack came from the rear, the trailing Red Tails would peel back in a perfectly timed counter-arc, creating a wall of defensive fire and turning the tables instantly. This wasn't just theory. It was born from necessity. The Germans were experts at exploiting gaps in coverage, using slashing attacks to isolate bombers. The Red Tails left no gaps. Their entire philosophy was about denial of airspace. You simply couldn't get near the bombers without paying a deadly price. The result was nothing short of astonishing. Bomber losses on red-tail escorted missions dropped to record lows. In fact, during 179 bomber escort missions, not a single bomber was lost to enemy fighters when under their direct protection. A statistic so incredible that even the U.S. Air Force had to double-check it. The red-tails' radio calls became the most reassuring sound in the sky. Pilots of the 15th Air Force would say, "If the red-tails got your back, you'll see dinner tonight." What made their approach revolutionary was that it wasn't driven by technological advantage. They were flying the same P-51 Mustangs as white units. What set them apart was discipline, coordination, and purpose. They weren't fighting for medals or kill tallies. They were fighting to prove themselves to a military establishment that doubted them at every turn. And that purpose burned hotter than any engine. When the Luftwaffe met them, they didn't face ordinary pilots. They faced men who had trained under impossible pressure. Men who had already won their first war just by earning their wings. By the summer of 1944, word began to spread among bomber crews. You want to get home? Ask for the red-tails. The Luftwaffe, meanwhile, started noticing something different. The bombers that used to scatter and burn under their attacks were suddenly making it through. German pilots reported frustration. The red-tail fighters never leave. They stay like wolves. That unwavering defense began to grind down the Luftwaffe's offensive rhythm, forcing them to rethink every engagement. And that's when the red-tails moved from defense to offense. By mid-1944, the red-tails were no longer just a defensive screen. They were the cutting edge of Allied air dominance. What began as a mission to protect bombers evolved into a campaign that systematically dismantled the Luftwaffe's ability to fight back. The red-tails did it not by sheer numbers or superior equipment, but by rethinking how the air war was fought. Their secret weapon wasn't the Mustang. It was adaptability. They learned to anticipate the Luftwaffe's tactics and counter them before the enemy even understood what had changed. One of their earliest innovations was a variation of the thatch weave, a defensive maneuver originally designed by U.S. Navy pilots in the Pacific. The red-tails adapted it for bomber escort operations over Europe, a brilliant twist. In the classic version, two fighters flew in a weaving pattern to cover each other's blind spots against an attacking enemy. But the red-tails modified it into a multi-layered weave involving entire sections of fighters interlocking above bomber formations.
When German fighters dove through the bombers, the Red Tail's interlocking weaves created overlapping kill zones. The Luftwaffe pilots, used to isolated dogfights, suddenly found themselves trapped in coordinated American crossfire, unable to escape without exposing their flanks. It turned every attack into a deadly gamble, and soon even veteran German aces began refusing to engage large bomber groups escorted by the Red Tails. But the Red Tails' innovation didn't stop at maneuvers. They began taking the fight directly to the Luftwaffe's infrastructure. Under Davis's direction, the 332nd started launching coordinated strikes not just on enemy aircraft in the air, but on the ground. They targeted airfields, rail hubs, and fuel depots, critical arteries that kept the Luftwaffe alive. Using precision flying and timing honed from escort missions, they developed rapid strike tactics. One squadron would lure enemy interceptors into combat, while another swooped in low to strafe parked fighters and fuel trucks. These raids crippled entire Luftwaffe wings before they could even take off. The Germans were stunned. Their intelligence reports began to describe the Red Tails as highly organized, disciplined, and unusually unpredictable. To them, this wasn't supposed to happen. They had been told that American colored units were experimental, temporary, even unreliable. But what they encountered was a group of pilots who fought with a calculated precision the Luftwaffe had not seen before. The Red Tails also understood something deeper: psychological warfare. They realized that consistency could be as devastating as any bullet. Every time a Red Tail mission ended with all bombers returning safely, it wasn't just a tactical success, it was a mental blow to the enemy. Luftwaffe pilots began to dread the Red Tails. In combat briefings, the color itself became a warning. Avoid Red Tails, they don't break formation. German morale in the air started to crack. Veteran pilots described the frustration of seeing entire bomber waves protected like fortresses, while younger Luftwaffe recruits were sent into suicide missions with failing engines and dwindling ammunition. By late 1944, the Red Tails had achieved something extraordinary. They had turned the Luftwaffe's own doctrine against it. Germany's entire aerial defense strategy had been built around initiative. Fast intercepts, quick strikes, and psychological dominance. The Red Tails reversed that dynamic. They denied initiative, neutralized speed with discipline, and turned every German sortie into a fight for survival. Their coordinated sweeps soon became legend. During one mission over southern Germany, the Red Tails escorted a formation of bombers targeting Munich's marshalling yards.
As Luftwaffe interceptors closed in, the Red Tails executed a series of high-altitude rolling maneuvers that scattered the enemy formation. Then, instead of pursuing, they turned their aggression on the nearby airfield at Landshut, destroying over a dozen aircraft on the ground. The mission's after-action report noted that not a single bomber was lost. For the Luftwaffe, it was another scar on an already broken defense. And perhaps the most telling sign of their dominance came from the enemy's own words. Captured German pilots admitted to U.S. intelligence officers that they had started requesting reassignment away from bomber intercept duties when Red Tails were reported in the area. "They fly like machines," one German lieutenant said. "Always in formation, never afraid. They don't fight for glory, they fight for the mission." In the end, the Red Tails' tactical brilliance didn't just protect bombers, it broke the Luftwaffe's spirit. Each successful mission eroded the myth of German aerial invincibility that had once terrified Europe. What began as an experiment in racial integration became one of the most effective air campaigns in the entire European theater. By late 1944, the skies over Germany were no longer the proud domain of the Luftwaffe. They had become hunting grounds for the Red Tails and their bomber formations, a slow, suffocating blanket of air dominance that crushed the Reich's last hopes of defending itself from above. But the most devastating effect of the Red Tails campaign wasn't measured in downed planes or destroyed hangars. It was in psychological collapse, the complete breakdown of morale, structure, and purpose within the Luftwaffe. It started with numbers. Every time the 332nd Fighter Group escorted bombers over critical industrial targets, oil refineries in Regensburg, ball-bearing plants in Schweinfurt, synthetic fuel facilities in Ploiești, they ensured those bombers reached their targets and returned. The Red Tails' presence directly correlated with mission success rates that shattered previous records. German radar operators began noticing a pattern. Wherever the Red Tails appeared, intercept missions failed. Luftwaffe Command tried to adapt, diverting experienced pilots and entire squadrons to challenge them. But the more they focused on fighting the Red Tails, the weaker other sectors became. It was like chasing shadows. For every attempt to regroup, the Allies struck somewhere else. Soon the Luftwaffe's resources were bleeding out. Aviation fuel, already scarce, was now being burned in frantic, unsuccessful sorties. Spare parts were non-existent, and perhaps worst of all, experienced pilots were dying faster than they could be replaced. Each time a veteran ace fell, an inexperienced trainee took his place, and the Red Tails, with their tight formations and flawless coordination, exploited that weakness mercilessly.
In one tragic statistic, by the winter of 1944, the average life expectancy of a new Luftwaffe pilot on the Western Front had dropped to less than 3 combat missions. As the Red Tails continued their runs, they unknowingly forced the Luftwaffe into a spiral of logistical destruction. To intercept the Allied bombers, the Germans had to fuel and maintain their interceptors, reposition radar systems, and man anti-aircraft defenses, all while their cities and factories were being bombed into rubble. With the 332nd ensuring bombing missions faced minimal interference, Germany's industrial base began to collapse under constant assault.
Oil production, already cut by more than half, dwindled to catastrophic levels by early 1945. Even Hitler himself, in his bunker briefings, raged that his once glorious Luftwaffe had become a shadow in the clouds. But perhaps the most profound collapse was human, not mechanical. German pilots began to lose faith. They had once been the hunters, swift, daring, proud. Now they were prey. Facing the Red Tails meant facing a force that never broke formation, never scattered, never faltered. Luftwaffe squadron diaries from late 1944 and early 1945 reveal a haunting pattern. Notes of exhaustion, fear, and disbelief. The enemy escorts are ghosts, one German Oberfeldwebel wrote after surviving a mission near Linz. They move with precision, no weakness, no fear. Our men panic when we see the Red Tails. The bombers fly untouched. The psychological effect spread beyond the skies. German civilians, once comforted by the sight of their own fighters intercepting Allied bombers, began to notice the absence. The once proud contrails of Luftwaffe interceptors vanished from their skies. City after city burned under the roar of unchallenged bombers. The myth of air protection, the idea that the Luftwaffe could still defend the homeland, disintegrated. And with it, so too did the last remnants of public faith in Nazi victory. As the Reich crumbled, even German command structure fractured. Veteran officers clashed with younger ones over tactics. Some argued for kamikaze-style attacks, others for complete withdrawal. But it didn't matter. The Red Tails had rendered their choices meaningless. Every sortie, every scramble, every desperate interception ended the same way: failure. By early 1945, the Luftwaffe's operational presence was virtually gone. Entire squadrons sat grounded for lack of fuel. The few aircraft that still flew were often destroyed on takeoff or landing by Allied strafing runs, many of those, ironically, conducted by Red Tail pilots themselves. German radar operators began to abandon their posts, realizing that the reports they sent, hundreds of bombers inbound, escorted by red-tailed fighters, were no longer warnings, but death sentences. When the Allies finally crossed the Rhine and bombers flew deeper into Germany than ever before, there was no resistance left. The sky belonged to the Red Tails and their brothers in arms. What had once been the most feared Air Force in history had been reduced to silence, not by overwhelming numbers alone, but by precision, patience, and the unwavering discipline of a squadron that was never supposed to succeed. The fall of the Luftwaffe wasn't just a military defeat. It was the collapse of a myth. The myth of racial superiority that had fueled the Nazi regime met poetic justice in the crimson wings of African-American pilots who flew higher, fought smarter, and stood unbreakable. Each red tail streaking across the sky became a symbol, not only of air superiority, but of moral triumph. When the guns finally fell silent in 1945, the Red Tails had flown more than 15,000 sorties, destroyed hundreds of enemy aircraft, and achieved what no one believed possible. Not a single bomber lost to enemy fighters under their direct escort. But beyond the statistics, their true victory lay in how they changed the very DNA of air warfare. Before the Red Tails, fighter doctrine was rooted in individual glory, the chase, the duel, the personal kill count. After the Red Tails, air superiority became a discipline of unity, coordination, and strategic patience. Their story forced the world to reconsider what true excellence looked like. Not reckless heroics, but relentless precision. The 332nd Fighter Group proved that technology alone never wins wars. Tactics, trust, and adaptability do. Their escort-first mentality, once mocked, became a cornerstone of post-war air strategy. The U.S. Air Force would later adopt many of their techniques for Cold War escort missions, from tight formation control to layered defense structures. Even modern stealth fighters, guided by AI-assisted coordination systems, owe a philosophical debt to those crimson-tailed Mustangs that refused to break formation. Every pilot trained in modern air forces, from the F-15s of the 1970s to today's F-35 Lightning IIs, studies a lineage of tactics shaped by Tuskegee discipline. Yet, perhaps the greatest lesson the Red Tails left behind wasn't written in military manuals. It was a lesson in human potential. They shattered a wall higher than any dogfight altitude, the wall of prejudice. In a time when segregation ruled the barracks and bigotry defined opportunity, these men carried not only the weight of their missions, but the burden of an entire race's reputation. They knew that every mistake would be magnified, every failure used as proof that they didn't belong. And so they chose perfection, not for fame, but for survival. In doing so, they redefined what professionalism and patriotism looked like. After the war, the irony was unmistakable. The same men who had defended democracy in Europe returned home to face segregation in America. Yet even then, they didn't stop fighting. Their legacy became a quiet revolution, inspiring President Truman's decision in 1948 to desegregate the U.S. Armed Forces, an act that changed American military history forever. The Red Tails had proven that excellence knows no color and courage no boundaries. Across decades, their legend only grew. Hollywood films, museums, and military academies have told their story. But the real power of the Red Tails isn't just in nostalgia, it's in relevance. Their mastery of teamwork, their innovative spirit, and their refusal to be underestimated remain timeless lessons for every generation of pilots and strategists. When modern fighter pilots train in simulators, when they coordinate drones and strike formations across continents, they are following in the contrails of those crimson-painted wings that once lit up the skies over Europe. And when we look back at the collapse of the Luftwaffe, we realize that history isn't just about machines and battles. It's about minds. The Red Tails didn't defeat the German Air Force by being faster or stronger. They did it by being smarter, steadier, and unbreakable. They turned precision into power and discipline into destiny. Their victory was not just military, it was moral. So the next time you see that flash of red on a P-51 Mustang's tail, remember, it wasn't just paint, it was a promise kept by men who changed the course of history through courage, intelligence, and unity. From the ashes of doubt, they rose to command the very skies once ruled by tyranny. And in doing so, they gave the world not only freedom, but proof that greatness can come from anywhere, if only given the chance to fly. And that was the story of the Red Tails, the squadron that turned discipline into dominance and brought down the once invincible Luftwaffe. If you enjoyed this story and love discovering forgotten chapters of history brought to life, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss a new episode. Until next time, this is your host signing off, reminding you that history isn't just about the past. It's the story of people who dared to change the future.